I'd like to give you a perspective from the UK, a European country that's not in Europe. Obviously, we used to be. Then we had Brexit. That's democracy. As Winston Churchill said, democracy, it's the worst political system, apart from all the others. Anyway, let me talk a bit about the UK. First of all, Mike Hawes, Chief Exec of the SMMT. We represent the automotive industry in the UK, not just manufacturers, but importers, supply chain, cars, bus, truck, taxi, aftermarket. We try and be a one-stop shop. As everyone has said, the industry is a critical part of the UK economy. It's a critical part of society, delivering the goods, the services, the transport, the mobility on which society depends. As an organisation, and my congratulations to APIA for 30 years, this year we are 122 years old. I was there at the beginning, but we were formed both to promote the industry and at the time defend it. And it is something I think we all still have to do at the moment. Now, politically, we have a new government. It's been in 102 days now. And it's inheriting some legislation, some regulation, but it's also bringing together some new ideas and new approaches. First and foremost, its number one priority is economic growth. And we see ourselves as very much part of that. And it announced on Monday an industrial strategy for the long term. And I think everyone in this room would appreciate that. The challenge is when you always face political terms, which may be 3, 4, 5 years. It's 3 years in Australia, isn't it? Yeah. 10 years is the minimum you need to have a transitional policy and an industrial one. But they've also inherited two things from the previous government. First, net zero. That is a statutory requirement. It is the law that the UK delivers net zero by 2050. And we have carbon budgets every 5 years, which are the law. If the government doesn't have in place policies that will deliver those incremental carbon savings, the NGOs, the green groups, take the government to court and win. The government then has to change its policies to deliver it. So this is not something you can backtrack on from a regulatory perspective. The second thing is this new government has said it will move the date for the end of sale of petrol and diesel cars from 2035 to 2030. Now, they don't actually mean totally zero emission. I think they will amend that to include hybrids. But this is going to be a priority. So matching the environmental ambition with the industrial ambition is the challenge. One other point to make in all of this. The government, the past one and the new one, have the same definition. They mean zero means zero. That's not just zero carbon, it is zero pollutants. Zero NOx, zero PM, which means combustion as part of the technological solution is under threat. Because if you are considering hydrogen combustion, you do produce trace elements of that. So we need to make sure in the formation of the policies, you both meet the obligations to be zero emissions, especially in towns and cities which have clean air zones, which is regulation that complements the carbon regulation, but also you maintain that consumer choice, and that's where the difficulty is. So where are we? In terms of the shift towards EVs, it's not bad, it's getting better. You can see the growth there in terms of electrical registrations. We expect this year to be somewhere between 18 and 90% pure battery emission vehicle emissions. So it's moving. Compare that to Europe. We're the second largest market for new car sales. We're the second largest market for battery electric vehicles after Germany. So that's looking quite good. Compared to the rest of Europe, we're actually more recently overperforming. As I said there, last year, total market growth, you can see where the figures are. But in terms of growth where we are at the moment, we're at 17.2% BV share. It's higher than Europe. Now, what is driving that? this is where you see the market movement. More models on the market. There's something like 120 battery electric vehicles on the market now in the UK. The market growth, though, has been driven 70 to 80% by business and fleet buyers. That's the engine of the change because they have incentives. In the UK market, there are no incentives for the private buyer to buy a battery electric vehicle, despite those high ambitions. So you can see the massive impact that the fleet buyers are having. And it makes sense. If, your company car tax, it makes a much more affordable choice. In terms of the where are these vehicles coming from? Increasingly, we are seeing more new battery electric vehicles coming from the rest of Europe. Initially, the new entrants were coming from China. And we get a lot of our vehicles which may look like they have a European badge or an American badge, but they come from China, lower cost base and so forth. All our Teslas, for instance, who is the market leader in terms of battery electric vehicles, come from China. So when you remember that we are, as an industry, 80% of what we produce, we export. As a market, over 80% of what we buy comes from abroad, so we're kind of in balance. The importance of free and fair trade is critical as you move very much part of this transition. But there's one piece of regulation that is driving this change in particular. We have in place a mandate. It came into force 1st of January. This compels every brand this year to sell 22%. I said we're about 17, 18 at the moment. By the end of the year, 22% of every sales must be zero emission vehicle. That's not plug-in hybrids, by the way. It's pure electric vehicle. That rises to 80% by 2030, potentially going to 100% 2035. That might go backwards. We are behind the curve, and the reason we are behind the curve is that what you're hearing from everyone is the level of private demand is below where the political ambition is. So what do we need? We say we need more incentives, more consumer incentives and so forth to try and drive that demand, which isn't there. And it's unsurprising. These vehicles are more expensive. There are uncertainties about infrastructure. The costs, some of which Tony alluded to, residual values, the cost of charging, the cost of electricity. Some of the assumptions that were behind this regulation haven't come to fruition. But be under no illusion, this is an incredibly challenging target. If you miss it, for every car that you miss it by, you have to pay £15,000 per car. And if you want to understand what's going on in the marketplace, we expect this year that the industry will incentivize, in other words, put cash on the bonnet, over £2 billion, what's that, over 12 billion Russian leu, just in incentives. That's not manufacturing, that's not distribution, that is in incentives alone to try and buy market share, because that natural level of demand isn't there. So it's hugely challenging. The other backdrop, and as we said before, I won't touch on this, infrastructure is behind the curve, and you need to build ahead of demand to ensure that the consumer is confident. But it's not just about cars, trucks as well. We spoke about it before. Again, government ambition, 2040 for the end of sale of diesel trucks, 2035 for trucks that are around 26 tons. Some of those vehicles you can see now already on the roads. Refuse collection vehicles, garbage trucks, it tends to lend itself more towards electrification because they go depot to depot, single shift. You are seeing some of those. Other use cases is much more difficult to achieve, but we need to achieve all of that. The good news sector, however, is the bus industry. Last year, we were the biggest market for zero-emission buses, over 45%, I think it was. Again, it lends itself towards electrification. You can package the batteries easily in a bus. You can do depot charging. You know which route they are doing, so you can model the use case. So different sectors, while facing the same target, have different solutions, but will move at different paces. And The challenge for the industry as a whole, and it is the entire industry, is to remove fossil fuel dependency by 2035. I think we are on the way to it, but unless every single part of the ecosystem, that is the manufacturers, it is government, it is the charge point industry, it's the energy industry, it's the leasing industry, it's the insurance industry. You need every single part of that ecosystem to play its role. Without it, it's no surprise that the consumer's much more hesitant. And what we are seeing, they'll take the approach, we'll just wait and see. And that's the worst thing you could have in terms of an outcome for carbon savings. Thank you very much.